Blood dripped down her thigh and painted the dust beneath her boots red. Jolie stumbled through the heat, her breath ragged, her face streaked with sweat and tears. Behind her the desert stretched endless, a sea of fire and sand. Her sister Rhea had dragged 1 foot. Her head bleeding, Mira, the oldest, was barely keeping them upright. They had not eaten in 2 days. They had not slept in 3. When they finally saw the wooden gate ahead, it felt like a mirage, but it was real. And then all 3 collapsed. Jack Callahan heard the sound before he saw them. Not footsteps, not voices, just a dull, heavy thud. For 15 years he had lived without a single visitor. 15 years since the fire, 15 years since Elena. He had chosen silence, and the world had honored his wish until now. He stepped outside, eyes squinting against the sun. 3 bodies lay motionless in front of his fence. 1 girl's leg was soaked in blood. Jack felt his instinct scream at him to turn away, but then the youngest lifted her head, her lips trembling. "Take it off. Let's do it." The words froze him. Her voice cracked, weak and desperate. He knelt beside her. Her face was pale, eyes half open. He pulled his duster off and covered her from the waist down. "I'll cut the seam," he said quietly. "Keep the blanket up." Mira's hand shook as she held the lantern. Rhea tore a strip from her dress and pressed it to her sister's wound. Jack worked fast. He sliced the pant leg open, wrapped his belt above the cut, and poured whiskey on the bleeding skin. The girl screamed once, then went still. When it was done, she grabbed his wrist, her pulse faint, but steady. "Please," she whispered, "don't let him find us." Jack looked up. The horizon shimmered under the afternoon sun. A thin line of dust was rising far away. It was moving toward his land. He had seen that kind of dust before. It always meant riders, and riders meant trouble. He had not touched a gun in 15 years, but that dust cloud was coming fast, and the fear in the girl's eyes was something he had not seen since the fire. Who was chasing them, and why had fate brought their nightmare straight to his door? Jack kept his eyes on that dust cloud for a long time. It was thin at first, like smoke from a campfire far away. Then it grew darker. He knew what that meant. Riders, even the horses, seemed to feel it. The air turned still like the land itself was listening, and not the friendly kind. Inside the cabin, the girls were barely hanging on. Mira paced by the window, her fingers trembling on the frame. Rhea tried to clean her sister's wound again, whispering something soft to keep her calm. Jolie just stared at the floor, her lips moving in a prayer that had no words. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and fear. It was a smell Jack hadn't known in 15 years, but it came back to him now, like a ghost walking through the room. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to Mira. "Drink slow," he said. She looked at him with eyes too sharp for her age. "Thank you, sir," she said, voice hoarse. Then she added, almost to herself, "We didn't think anyone lived this far out." Jack half smiled. "Most folks don't," he said. "That's kind of the point." The words came out dry, but his chest felt tight. He looked at the 3 of them and saw more than just strangers. He saw ghosts of what he had lost. Elena's face flickered in his mind, and for a second he could smell her perfume under all that dust and fear. He stepped outside again. The sky burned orange, the kind of color that makes you think of endings. The dust cloud had split now. He could count at least 4 riders, maybe 5, moving steady, not rushing. The kind of men who knew exactly what they were after. He walked back inside and reached for the rifle that hung on the wall. His hand hesitated halfway. He hadn't touched that gun since the fire. He had promised himself never again, but promises don't hold up too well when the past rides straight at your front gate. Mira's voice cut through the silence. "They're coming for us." Jack turned slowly. "How do you know that?" Her eyes met his. "Because one of them is my father." Jack froze. The room went still. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant hoof beat-ats. "How do you protect 3 girls when the devil chasing them has your name carved in his heart?" For a moment the room was silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Jack stood still, the rifle heavy in his hands. He looked at Mira, then at the other two girls, their faces pale and waiting. "Your father," he said slowly. "Who is he?" Mira swallowed hard. "Logan Creed." The name hit Jack like a bullet. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 15 years. Creed, the man who had once been his brother in arms, the man who had burned everything down the night Elena tried to leave. Jack sat down at the edge of the table. His voice was low, rough like gravel. "Tell me everything." Mira looked at her sisters, then took a small silver locket from around her neck. The chain was broken, the metal scratched, but the engraving was still clear. Inside was a tiny picture of a woman, Elena, and a folded piece of paper worn thin from years of hiding. Mira handed it to Jack. She said, "If we ever found you to give you this." Mira hesitated, then added softly, "Mama said, if we were ever in danger, to find the man beyond the dry river where the hill meets the dust. She said you'd know what to do." Jack opened it with shaken hands. The note was short. The ink had faded, but the words still burned. "I never blamed you." Jack felt something twist in his chest. All those years hiding from the world, from his own guilt, and now her forgiveness sat in his palm. He looked at Mira again. "She's gone," he said quietly. Mira nodded. "Creed came that night, tried to take her back. He wanted to prove she still belonged him." Mira's voice grew tight. "He used to follow her everywhere, said she was his and always would be. She kept the locket hidden because he'd go mad if he saw it." Rhea spoke up, her voice trembling. "He poured oil around the house, said he just wanted to scare her. The fire got out of control." Mira looked down. "She pushed us out the back window. Jolie was just a child." The room felt smaller then, heavy with things that couldn't be changed. Jack stared at the locket one more time, then closed it tight in his fist. "So, he's still hunting you?" Mira nodded. "He wants the locket. It proves everything, that he's the one who caused the fire. He'll never stop until it's gone." Outside, thunder rolled across the open plains, low and distant, the kind of sound that always came before trouble. Jack stood up. "If he's coming, he won't find you alone. If you've been listening this far, take a moment to breathe, grab your coffee or maybe your evening tea and stay with me. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. And if you want to hear how this storm ends, hit that subscribe button, because the next part is where the fire truly starts. That night, the wind howled across the valley. The sound carried through the cabin walls like a warning. Jack sat alone at the table, the silver locket in front of him. The candle light flickered on its surface, and every flicker felt like a heartbeat. He had spent 15 years running from the past. Now it was sitting right there, staring back at him. He stood up and walked to the corner of the cabin. There was an old wooden chest covered in dust and spider webs. He had not opened it since the night he swore to never touch a gun again, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the silence of the desert carried footsteps that did not belong. The hinges groaned as he lifted the lid. His eyes flicked to the floorboards near the back wall. The trapdoor and the tunnel beneath were still there, untouched since the day he built them. Inside lay the live he had buried, a Winchester rifle, clean but untouched. That night he sat under the lantern light and ran a cloth down the barrel. His fingers shook a little, but the old rhythm came back, slow and steady, like a scar that never healed. A revolver wrapped in oiled cloth, and at the very bottom a faded, wanted poster with his own face. The edges were yellow and torn, but the name still read clear. Jack Callahan, wanted for murder in 30 towns. He almost laughed. 30 men, the paper said. Half were real, the rest were ghosts Creed left on his back. Guess they never found the right number, he muttered. Outside, Mira and Rhea were checking the horses. Jolie sat by the fire, her leg wrapped tight. When Jack stepped out with the rifle, all 3 girls looked up. They could see it in his face. The quiet man who had saved them was gone. What stood before them now was someone else, someone they needed. He showed them how to load the rifles, how to aim low and steady. Bria's hands trembled, but Jack's voice kept her calm. "Breathe, let the sight settle, then squeeze." She hit the tin can on her second try. A small smile crossed her face for the first time in days. The sky burned orange again as the sun went down. In the distance, coyotes howled. And the girls grew quiet. Jack looked at the ridge line where the first stars were showing. He knew the men were close now, too close. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the rifle in his hands. It felt both foreign and familiar, like shaking hands with an old enemy. The night before, storm always feels calm, too calm. What none of them knew was that Logan Creed was already closer than any of them could imagine. The morning came quiet, too quiet. The desert always had a way of holding its breath before something bad. Jack stood on the porch, the rifle leaning against his shoulder. He could taste the dust in the air. It meant riders were close. Mira came out first, holding the locket tight in her hand. Rhea followed, her face pale but steady. Jolie limped behind them, her legs still wrapped, but her eyes sharp. Jack looked at the three of them and felt that heavy ache. Again, they were too young for this kind of fear, but fear was all the desert had left to offer. Then he saw it, 4 riders breaking the horizon, moving slow and steady. Their shadows stretched long across the dirt. At the front rode Logan Creed, even from a distance. Jack knew that posture. That calm control. 15 years, and the man still sat a horse like he owned the earth. The girls ducked inside as the riders closed in. Jack stepped down from the porch. He stopped halfway between the cabin and the gate. The sun was hot on his neck. Creed reined his horse and smiled a thin, cold smile. "Always did like your hideaways, Jack," he called out. "You picked a fine spot to die." Jack didn't answer. His eyes moved in counting positions. 2 men flanked left, one on the ridge, one by the corral. They thought they had him boxed in. They were wrong. Even the wind stopped moving. The world waited. A crack split the air. The lookout on the ridge dropped first. Then the man by the corral. The other 2 scattered, shouting. Creed never flinched. He just smiled wider. "Still got a steady hand," he said. "Guess some ghosts don't fade." Jack lowered the rifle slightly, and his voice was calm. "You lit the match, Creed. You burned her and called it love." Creed's eyes hardened. "She belonged to me." Jack shook his head. "She never belonged to anyone." For a long second, neither man moved. The wind carried the sound of the burning oil cans that Creed's men had thrown. Flames began to lick the walls of the old cabin, the same smells, the same sound. 15 years ago, all over again. Mira's voice came from inside the cabin. "Jack, the tunnel." He turned once, saw her eyes in the smoke, then looked back at Creed. "I'm not running this time." But what Creed said next made even Jack's blood run cold. Creed's smile faded. The smoke curled between them, thick and gray, hiding the years, but not the truth. His voice cracked just once. "She was carrying my child that night." Jack froze. His mind screamed her name, but all that came out was silence. The air felt heavier than the fire itself. Creed's hand went to his gun, but Jack was faster. A single shot echoed, and the revolver spun out of Creed's hand, landing in the dirt. Creed fell to his knees, clutching his wrist. For a moment, he looked less like a monster and more like a broken man. Creed's eyes burned with hate as he hissed through the pain. "You think this ends it, Jack?" "It's never over." Jack stepped closer, the rifle aimed steady, his face calm. "You'll live, Creed," he said quietly. "That's the part you'll hate most." He turned and walked away as the flames took what was left of the cabin. Behind him, the desert swallowed the sound of Creed's curses and the crack of burning wood. Days later, riders from Calico Pines found him half buried in the ash. The locket was the only proof left to end his story for good. Hours later, Jack found the girls waiting by the ridge, right where he told them to go. They were safe, but their faces were hollow, eyes red from smoke and tears. Mira handed him the locket again. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "No, I just finally stopped running." In the days that followed, they built a small camp by the dry river. No one spoke much, but every shared meal felt like a step toward healing. Jack boiled water and cleaned Jolie's wound each night, using herbs he gathered from the ridge. It took weeks before she could walk without pain, but her eyes grew brighter each day. When the first green shoots appeared in the sand, Jack knew it was time to move on. Months passed. The land around Calico Pines began to heal, and so did they. Jack built a small house near the river, a place that smelled of pine and bread instead of gunpowder and guilt. He worked the soil, fixed the fences, taught Jolie how to ride without fear. The people in town called him Uncle Jack, but to the girls he was something more. He was the man who stayed sometimes in the quiet of dusk. He would stand by the porch and hear Elena's voice in the wind. She always sounded peaceful now, and in that peace he found his own. Life has a way of giving us second chances, doesn't it? The real question is, what do we do? When they finally come, do we keep running from the fire, or do we walk through it and build something new on the other side? If this story touched you even a little, give it a like so more people can find it. And if you want to hear more stories about courage and redemption and the wild heart of the West, hit subscribe and stay close. Now tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere out there in the quiet of the desert, Jack Callahan is still watching the sunset and keeping his promise.